Today, the White House sent a letter to the head of the Smithsonian, one of the great museums of the world, which is actually 21 museums in all. In the letter, they made it clear to Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie Bunch III, writing that it wants what it wants and why from 8 of their museums initially, with more to come. Quoting now from the administration's letter, quote, "This initiative aims to ensure alignment with the president's directive to celebrate American exceptionalism, remove divisive or partisan narratives, and restore confidence in our shared cultural institutions." They're beginning a review of the Smithsonian's plan for celebrating the 250th anniversary of American independence next year, but that's hardly all. Even as it says the goal is not to interfere with day-to-day operations, the White House goes on to demand from each museum a full catalog of all current and ongoing exhibitions and budgets, a list of all traveling exhibitions and plans for the next 3 years, and all internal guidelines, including staff manuals, job descriptions, and organizational charts, along with internal communications about exhibition artwork selection and approval. The letter concludes with this: "By focusing on Americanism, the people, principles, and progress that define our nation, we can work together to renew the Smithsonian's role as the world's leading museum institution," which on its own might sound like a noble ambition, but it does not, of course, stand alone. It comes as part of what has been the administration's ongoing effort to purge government websites and American historical sites of references to Black Americans, gay and lesbian Americans, and transgendered Americans. At one point, even flagging for removal on a Pentagon website a photo of the B-29 bomber that dropped the first atomic bomb in combat. The plane was nicknamed the Enola Gay. A somewhat ironic Control-F fail, apparently, but also part and parcel of a deeply serious administration effort to eliminate from government websites any mention, photograph, or video that, quote, promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion. What followed was the elimination of references to Black and Latino war heroes, gay service members, and the effort to integrate the armed services starting in 1948. And what followed in March was an executive order targeting the Smithsonian for coming, quote, under the influence of a divisive race-centered ideology. Now, that order signaled out one of the 8 museums named in the letter today, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and specifically something someone wrote on a museum website once in 2020 and was quickly taken down, in which the Secretary Bunch, spoke about in front of Congress in 2023.
I think that the document itself was wrong and flawed. I do think, however, it's important for the Smithsonian to help the country grapple with questions of race. So I'm not going to run away from that. But I agree with you very much that that document is not the kind of document that should be at the Smithsonian.
He acknowledged it was inappropriate and wrong and took it down. But if you've ever been to this museum, in addition to being powerful and moving, it's upsetting and it is unsettling, just like parts of our history are. Parts of the administration has already taken steps to edit out or in, as the case may be. In June of 2020, protesters in Washington pulled down a statue of a Confederate Army General, Albert Pike. A short time later, the president, who was then running for re-election, said something that spoke to that moment, and it seems to this moment as well.
The unhinged left-wing mob is trying to vandalize our history, desecrate our monuments, our beautiful monuments, tear down our statues, and punish, cancel, and persecute anyone who does not conform to their demands for absolute and total control.
Well, last week, the National Park Service announced that the statue of Albert Pike, who was, just to repeat, a Confederate general, a traitor, would be restored to its place in the district to conform to recent executive orders, including the one in March to restore, quote, truth and sanity to American history. Joined now by New York Times' White House correspondent Maggie Haberman. So where is this coming from in the White House? I mean, is this from the president himself?
This is from a lot of people around the president and encouraged by the president. As you noted, the president talked about this in 2020. He actually talked about that prior to 2020, the broader concept in 2017 when the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia happened. And he started talking to aides about how he liked the idea of talking about heritage. And that became something that he would focus on in public addresses and public speeches. This is just a continuation of that. This is not necessarily a long-held belief of Donald Trump's, which is something a lot of advisors have tried to insist, but it is a long-held belief of a number of conservatives that they are upset about a focus on race. As you said, race and controversy around race and how Black people have been treated in this country, it is not really subjective. It just is. There are ugly aspects of the history, and so Trump saying that people are being controlled or censored or canceled. He is, as you suggest, efforting some kind of a different approach, doing what critics would argue something similar.
Yeah, I mean, we saw early on in the administration sort of these ham-fisted efforts to purge all government websites at the Pentagon of any references to black people or gay people, taking books out of the library at military academies by black authors or about the black experience in America, whereas I think the Times noted Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler was allowed to stay in. I think a Toni Morrison book was taken out. I think it was Beloved. Is there a sense of, is somebody in the White House themselves running point on this? Or?
I think there are a couple of people in the White House who are running point on this. You saw that letter was signed by a couple of advisors. One is somebody who works in the staff secretary's office. One is Russ Vought at the Office of Management and Budget. There's a third who I'm not placing right now in memory, but there are a couple of people who are involved in this effort. It goes beyond what we have seen, where Trump is talking about campaign promises, right? He repeatedly said on the campaign trail, I'm going to end, DEI. And this is something Republicans have talked about for a long time, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And there were a lot of complaints from some of his corporate backers about those programs. I don't know that people who supported him necessarily knew that this was going to be what he intended in terms of undoing aspects or rewriting aspects or, rewriting what can be presented about aspects of the country's history.
It's also interesting because they're focusing on 8 of the 21 museums of the Smithsonian Institution, but there's no reason it would stop there.
No, we have seen him, as you say, we have seen him expand this effort as far as he has so far, because he's not really facing a ton of pushback. And I think the institutions that find themselves in his crosshairs, or in his focus, I should say, aren't really sure quite what to do, because if they push back in some cases, then they feel like they're feeding into a narrative. If they submit completely, then they're feeding into a different narrative. So they're faced with a lot of imperfect choices. It's
so interesting. It's the conflict Democrats face when talking about the policing in the District of Columbia. Do you point out statistics of it's a 30-year low, as the statistics show? And thereby sound like you're saying, there's not a crime problem in Washington, D.C., when there's a crime problem everywhere.
Right, and I think you see that in terms of how Mayor Bowser has reacted. Look, she's not there is a crime problem everywhere. In multiple cities. Big cities have traditionally had crime problems.
Human beings, there's crime everywhere.
Correct. And certainly, we saw crime rates spike during COVID. In some cases, we have seen it come down. But there are a lot of people who feel unsafe in big cities. And so if the mayor pushes back on the president, she sounds like she's not addressing concerns of constituents. Those are the choices.
Right. Maggie Abraham, thanks very much. President Trump, in his address to a joint session of Congress earlier this year, took credit for what he said was the end of wokeness.
We've ended the tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies all across the entire federal government and indeed the private sector and our military. And our country will be woke no longer.
Joining me now for more on this is former president and CEO of the NAACP, Cornell William Brooks, who's a Harvard professor and CNN chief political analyst, David Axelrod, former senior advisor to President Obama. Cornell, we've talked before about how accepting and learning from shameful periods in American history actually make this country stronger. What do you make of this now review of the Smithsonian, or at least 8 museums at the Smithsonian?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. But let us know this. This most recent effort to censor the Smithsonian is a matter of making bad worse. So we had an executive order that contributed to a chilling effect with respect to the Smithsonian. But here what we have is censorship tied to a celebration, namely the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the founding of our country. And the White House is essentially engaged in a kind of cultural micromanagement. We have 3 government officials who have no expertise in curation, no expertise as historians, no expertise in terms of culture or art, attempting to micromanage the crown jewel of American culture and history, namely the Smithsonian. And to what end? We need to be very clear about this and be very honest. What they're trying to do is essentially weaponize African Americans as Americans. So in other words, to the degree that we and so many others have contributed to the Declaration of Independence, the history of this country. So thinking about the fact that Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, was brilliant philosophically, but flawed morally in terms of owning enslaved people. And yet the document that he wrote was cited by the grandson of enslaved people, namely Martin Luther King, on the Mall in order to free this country, to advance this country. So in other words, we have to tell the whole truth, the complete truth, not a sanitized, homogenized, White House whitewashed version of the truth. Because when we do so to the detriment of our history and the detriment of our country. And frankly, this is, again, a matter of making bad worse.